Countdown.
They said there's no clocks in baseball. I don't know about that.
Welcome into the DNVR Rockies podcast, brought to you by Strava Craft Coffee. Remember to use that promo code DNVR20 because when you do, you get 20% off your entire purchase of that CBD-infused, deliciously rich, and potentially life-altering Strava Craft Coffee. I'm your host, Drew Creasman. I'm the managing editor of DNVR Rockies. With me, as always, is beat writer Patrick Lyons. But enough about us. We've got with us today, now we've had the voice of the Rockies on television for the last couple of days, but now we have the chronicler of the Rockies for the last several years. What is it now at this point? Thomas Harding of MLB.com has been covering the Colorado Rockies
since 2000, so I guess this will be the 22nd year. Does that just that just makes me old. 22nd year. I almost should be wearing a bow tie or something, sitting here, maybe with a pipe in my mouth. I remember back in 2000. Yeah.
Oh, yes, all the way back then. Well, you long career, you're compiling some great statistics there, like a lot of the guys who were on this year's Hall of Fame ballot, but that's where we wanted to start getting your reactions. No one inducted this year, Thomas Harding, into the MLB BBWAA, more letters, Hall of Fame.
No one inducted, no one reached the 75%. Hey, it's a hard Hall of Fame to get into. Unlike other sports where there are other methods, they do go to the Baseball Writers Association of America, the people that have earned the privilege of voting, and you have to have 75% of them or else you don't get in. And that's why there are very good players, even great players, that take a long time to be inducted, and this year no one went in. Second time, it last happened in 2013.
And it's happened 4 times total now. And tip of the cap to Jason Stark, who noticed that the last 4 times that it's happened, the person who had the highest percentage of votes that year got into the Hall of Fame next year, which if it rings true here, that statistic, that would mean Curt Schilling would go in his 10th and final year. Then again, he doesn't want to even be associated now with the voting process. So I don't know what to make of it.
Well, he did ask to be taken off the ballot, but I'm not really sure he has that right to. He can't just say, I'm off the ballot, so therefore I'm off the ballot. The board of directors of the Hall of Fame, it appears they have the final decision, but the Baseball Writers Association of America, they make the rules, as we all know, and we'll see what happens with that.
Is that something you can do? Like, I just want to know, like if you get nominated for an Academy Award or something, can you just be like, no. I take myself out of consideration. I've never heard of this before. Like,
yeah, never heard of it. But then again, a lot of stuff you hear out of Curt Schilling's mouth off his Twitter, Facebook, you never heard and didn't want to hear it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's particularly interesting when, and I'm sure we'll get into it, the players from the PED era during a time in which it wasn't illegal as far as MLB's rules are concerned, but it was illegal by society standards. Regardless, you have some controversial figures that are stuck around, for that 10th year with Bonds and Clemens, and now we've got Alex Rodriguez and David Ortiz coming on, and I think the bottom line is voters in the BBWAA, they've been put in a really bad spot, and I think it's good that these ballots are public, and we have this transparency. But again, the voters are these messengers, and they're in a no-win situation. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, they are. They're in a no-win situation. And by the way, I should be voting, but I'm not. I just mentioned that. You have to be a member of the BBWAA for 10 consecutive seasons. And for many years, they didn't let MLB.com in until they figured out that they needed our numbers and our dues. And we're in there now. But hey, let's let bygones be bygones. But yeah, it can be a tough spot. And the rules are intentionally vague. There's a character clause in there. There's something like citizenship or something like that to where writers can make a decision based on the player. The issue with the PEDs, which I believe is a very difficult one, is this. There are people in the Hall of Fame who use PEDs. My thought on that is also, if I could take the known PED users and compute their stats against fellow PED users as opposed to non-PED users, then hey, I've got a way to quantify it. I can't quantify this. There's no possible way I can quantify it. So that's the way I feel about PEDs affecting a Hall of Fame vote. I'm not sure that they do, because you can't really say, and this is the problem I have with it is, you cheated, but you didn't cheat. How long does it take to be a steroid abuser? Do you do it to get over an injury one off season? Do you do it in the middle of a season? Or do you have to do it X number of years? So there is a lot with that you have to unpack if you're going to consider that in the voting.
Yeah, I think it's, it can be a really complicated issue. We published a thing just this morning where I way oversimplified it in my own terms, because I do go, they cheated, man, and that doesn't mean that they weren't the greatest in the game. As I said in the article, Shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose were some of the greatest to ever play the game too. And there's there are certain lines you don't cross. But I do think that that's interesting as well, because I've often been more swayed. I think I've come close as Patrick and even Drew Goodman have made some of these arguments to being like, well, but Bonds and Clemens, maybe it's just something different. And it's kind of like you were saying, maybe some of these other guys, maybe Sammy Sosa's not a Hall of Famer without the PEDs, right? Some of these other guys, maybe Gary Sheffield, you go, maybe not. And if you're comparing them to each other, but Bonds and Clemens, like, I don't know, man. It's tough. It's really tough for me, Thomas. Let me say, I'm glad I don't have my vote yet.
Well, and when I look at it this way. Mike Piazza is in. There were rumors about him. Jeff Bagwell is in. There were rumors about him. I remember even before any of that, didn't Reggie Jackson have a quote that said there are already PED users in the Hall of Fame? So it gets a bit selective. So I guess if you had to go to court over it, then you're not eligible. If you didn't have to go to court, it's okay. You see, this is where the logic turns into a pretzel for me.
Yeah.
It's
really
incredibly difficult to figure that out. And like you said, if you could somehow subtract the performances of these known PED users against the rest of the population, well, even still, so if BBWA is not voting in certain guys into the Hall of Fame and they're taking away that certain percentile of their votes, shouldn't the next tier of player then reap the rewards of it? Guys like Todd Helton, which we'll get to, and maybe even a Bobby Abreu, Jeff Kent, guys that you would say, maybe these guys are on the cusp. Well, if we're cutting off 4 or 5 guys off the ballot that we've already mentioned because they're PED users, then shouldn't the next 4 or 5 talented guys be worthy of being inducted?
I'm not sure on that, because when you look at the history of this game, you never go to the next group of people. It's always the cream of the crop there. So I could see where the Hall of Fame voters, they tend to believe it's better not to have an inductee than to have a lesser inductee. And right now they're saying it's not to have an inductee. It's better not to have one at all than have PED users. And I guess the issue that I have with it is, you remember the Mitchell report on PED use in professional baseball? There were a lot of players in that, including a lot of players that will never be mentioned in the Hall of Fame.
Sure.
Now, you could, and at their level, you argue maybe they wouldn't have even been major leaguers without them. That you don't know. But they were playing against the best of the best. It's almost like they skated through. Maybe they got into the Mitchell report, maybe they didn't. but they skated through with no punishment. And the people who are being punished are the ones at the very top of the game. So that is a way of looking at it.
Yeah, and the other line of demarcation is the PED users that we know are the ones who got caught, and then there are ones who didn't get caught, and then there's the third group of those who really played the game the right way, and we'll almost never know those things.
Well, you're missing the fourth group, though, which is those who were suspected, and that's a really large group. You have a large group of people that were suspected. A few of them got caught. I think that David Ortiz had a positive test. Excuse me, Alex Rodriguez. He had the situation that became a legal situation. So some of those guys did get caught, but a whole lot of people never got caught on a test, but maybe were suspected at the time.
Manny Ramirez twice got busted. And
Right.
And to your point, I think it's easier to not vote these guys in, because once they're in, you can't take them out. We know this. We've known races. Cap Anson still in the Hall of Fame, shouldn't be, but they haven't figured out a way to remove him yet. Whereas if you don't vote in a guy in just yet, you've got veterans committees that can tackle that situation down the line. It's a shame guys are now waiting 15, maybe 20 years after their playing career to get in, but you can at least fix that situation if you just stand pat.
Yes, and when I look at it, I am not all that heartbroken that they aren't in now personally, and I covered that era, and the problem covering it is you didn't know who was a PED user and who wasn't. You didn't want to point your finger at somebody, then be sitting in a libel suit somewhere. So that was an issue. But they all played under the rules at the time. I mean, it was illegal in society. But hey, you go back to from the end of World War II until the PED era, there was a lot of use of amphetamines, especially day games after night games. I think someone actually did a statistical study that the bigger effect was not steroid testing, but testing for the stimulants, because the numbers in day games after night games really dropped. So I'm more or less thinking, why not just judge it on who they were at the time that they played under all the conditions that they played? Because you're right, we can't go back and remove a pre-integration Babe Ruth from the Hall of Fame. So I don't know that we're really qualified to discount records. Maybe we are. I think everybody's vote is everybody's vote. I think that the people who turned in blank ballots, if they said there's nobody I feel comfortable voting for, I think that's a legitimate vote.
I think for me, the part about this that frustrates me the most, simply when it comes to the Hall of Fame voting part, is that it feels, and I could be totally projecting this, but it feels like there's a lot of guys who either already didn't get in from this era, and in the last week we've talked a lot about Fred McGriff and Carlos Delgado, and then these guys who are on the ballot right now, who I think are pretty obvious Hall of Famers, and Todd Helton and Scott Rowland. And I think they don't feel like Hall of Famers to people because they played during an era where you were supposed to hit 50 home runs a year, maybe challenge for 70, which we kind of know now, like, that's not real. That's not a real expectation to have of a ball player, but they didn't feel like these sort of massive gods of the game that Barry Bonds and David Ortiz and Alex Rodriguez felt like. And so I feel like in some ways these guys have warped the perception of an entire era of what it even means to be a Hall of Famer, so that we look at someone like Todd Helton or Scott Rowland and go, you weren't even that good. It's like, these guys were incredible ball players. So I think I'd feel so much better, and I've said this a couple times, about guys like Bonds and Clemens getting in if Helton and Rowland were in, but also if we can go back and take a closer look at Fred McGriff and Carlos Delgado and some of these guys who, put up incredible career numbers that would stand up in any other time. They just don't look as good next to these other numbers that we know aren't real.
Yeah, well, when I look at it, go back to an earlier era where it took forever for Jack Morris and Burt Blyleven to get into the Hall of Fame. I think the players you're referring to, whether it's guys who are on the ballot now like Helton and Rowland, whether it's someone like Delgado, who I believe it's criminal that he dropped immediately off the ballot. There was no reason for that. You do have the Veterans Committee to take care of them. And to be honest with you, when you look at Clemens and Bonds, when you look at Curt Schilling and his abhorrent views since his career, if they don't get in, to me, they don't get in. The guys that the guy that I wanted in that never got in, whether it's through the writers or the Veterans Committee, Dick Allen, and he's not here to enjoy it if they ever do come to their senses and put him in the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to cry for Curt Schilling when I know that Dick Allen was a rightful Hall of Famer and was basically kept out. Why? Because he was an outspoken black man.
And they had a lot of opportunities to do that as well. Curt Flood, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, again, on the field, maybe not as valuable of a player as Dick Allen, but still a guy who's overlooked. Kenny Lofton also dropped off the ballot 1 year. And you go, well, this was a guy that even late in his career was, a final piece to a couple playoff teams. And you just, again, it's just a shame because there's so much noise kind of as you just articulated, Drew, there's so much noise around a lot of these big name guys that, pull votes away or just pull attention away and really, take away from some of these players that were still great players. They weren't that top 1%. They weren't Willie Mays. And again, Barry Bonds is in that conversation when you talk about the 1%, the top 1% of the top 1%. Clemens, you could throw in that group in many ways. But it's just a shame that we get some of those guys overlooked. And like you said, you can be added via Veterans Committee, but if you're gone and you pass away, unfortunately, like it was with the case of Dick Allen just this past year, there's no way to undo that. You can't fix that.
And then there's real consequences. Like when he passed away and I end up on his baseball reference page and I'm going, okay, I've heard this name before. And I go, man, it's criminal that I didn't know how good this guy was until the day that he died. And part of it is not being in the Hall of Fame. There are real consequences to that stuff. So
yeah,
I shed no tears for Curt Schilling either. I said all that yesterday. I mean, totally. Like now when you put it in that context, like seriously.
Right. And you go back to Dick Allen, you go back to Curt Flood. Curt Flood is a different category for me. And it's a category that I think baseball is missing, those influential figures that maybe weren't totally Hall of Famers. But you look at Curt Flood, though, why was he not a Hall of Famer? Because his career didn't last long enough. Why did it not last long enough? Because he said, I am not a piece of paper. I'm not a slave that can be traded and forced to work where I don't want to work. It turned out he was right in the courts of America, but he was drummed out by the game itself. Dick Allen, I mean, it's something as simple as people wanted to call him Richie, and he said, Richie is like calling me some guy's little brother. I don't want that. I want dignity out there. And really, I think that the media at the time, they looked at him as this controversial black figure. And during the 60s and the 70s, you know what happened to a lot of those figures in society. And he never got to do he was deserved from the writers. So those are things that bother me when I think about the Hall of Fame. When it comes to a guy like Curt Schilling, not really. When it comes to someone like Bonds or Clemens, I look at it, and if I were voting, and I'm not right now, I would vote for those guys. I would. And everyone could argue with it. And that's, I guess, the great and horrible thing about Twitter and that everybody comes at you screaming. But guess what? If you were in the Baseball Writers Association for 10 consecutive years, you have that right to vote. And no matter what anybody else says, they don't have it. And sometimes you just have to say, that's wonderful. Go cover the game for 10 years and then you can vote.
And there's so many mixed signals too, because again, you said you covered these guys and you didn't know who was using, who wasn't. And the commissioner didn't know who was using and who wasn't. But he's in the Hall of Fame. And yet all of the players that played during that era, we look the other way. Going back to Dick Allen and Curt Flood, that had the overlap with Philadelphia, because Curt Flood, like he said, the fantastic book called Well-Paid Slave. I recommend everybody read it, know your baseball history, and got traded to Philadelphia, where Dick Allen was, and said, yeah, it's not a very tolerant city to be playing in. And yet his, not his agent, but one of the many representatives at that time, Marvin Miller, we finally saw him get to go in for what he was able to do, not on the field, not even in the front office, but just as the leader of the Players Association. So there are these weird mixed signals that we get where these people are allowed to get in, but these people aren't. And there's this direct correlation between the two. It's very fuzzy.
We live in the United States of America, and that happens a lot in our country. So the Baseball Hall of Fame can be a microcosm of it. And listen, I still think it's the best Hall of Fame simply because of what's going on now. I mean, we discuss it. It means something to people. I'm not sure that you know who is in the Basketball Hall of Fame. The Football Hall of Fame, you know who's in there. You don't know how they got there because the process, I still haven't. Baseball, what happens, you turn in a ballot, and if you want it released publicly, you release it publicly.
There's not enough fun metrics to figure out who's a good offensive lineman in the NFL. You know, maybe if there were some more of those, we could talk about.
Although that's one of the reasons why I would watch football, because sometimes you just get sick of the metrics. Can this guy play? Can this guy block the guy in front of him? Can this guy hit? Can this guy win you a baseball game? I don't want to see your war. I want you to go out there.
He's blocking above replacement.
Yeah. And in baseball, I want you to go out there and win against the other team. I don't want theoretical war. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to talk about if you're the chattering class, but the reason I cover baseball is they keep a score, and at the end of the day, somebody wins, somebody loses, somebody's at the top of the standings, somebody's at the bottom, and someone carries off a trophy. That's why I cover baseball. It's not to argue about numbers.
Love it. I love getting Thomas into this one too. I want to now, before we move into the Rockies section of stuff here and talk about those guys. We haven't looked forward too much yet. During all this Hall of Fame week, we've been talking about all this stuff. We haven't looked to next year. So Will comes with an interesting question, and we'll go ahead and toast. Normally, I would toast my Breck Brew of the day to whoever just got inducted into the Hall of Fame, but I'm not toasting a Breck Brew to nobody. I'm pretty sure that's bad juju. You don't do that. And I don't have my Breck Brew either. I'm taking a day off. But you out there, toast your Breck Brew. I'll do mine theoretically to the players who will be on the Hall of Fame ballot next year for the first time. I want to get your thoughts on these guys. As soon as I'm done here, I'm going to be grabbing onto that Hot Peak IPA, by the way. No Avalanche game tonight. It's Nuggets night, so it's Hot Peak IPA night. I save my Avalanche Amber Ale for when the hockey boys are going. That's a special hockey time beer. But whether you get the 15-can sampler, get it down at the King Soopers, wherever you do, you can toast your Breck Brew to, as Will asking about these guys. Of course, we've got A-Rod and Ortiz coming in to add to the complexity and confusion with the PED stuff we talked about there. But then other guys like Mark Teixeira, Jimmy Rollins, Jake Peavy, and Ryan Howard.
Don't forget Carl Crawford. Don't forget Tim Lincecum, Prince Fielder. We've got some names
Hall of Fame
coming up
that didn't put together a Hall of Fame.
Jonathan Papelbon, AJ Pierzynski. Don't necessarily think he's a Hall of Famer, but he should be mentioned. And we'll probably be on that Hall of Fame ballot.
We better drop off somewhere. Right around
what we're looking at is who stays on the ballot after next year, or who gets that one vote for being a great statesman for the game, like Bob Nightingale threw the vote out there for LaTroy Hawkins that I was very happy with. I mean,
he got two.
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't going to keep somebody out of the Hall of Fame. I think for someone to honor him that way, I'm fine with that.
And do we think if Ryan Howard gets into the Hall of Fame, will he wear an Albuquerque Isotopes hat? Do we know?
I doubt he's still one of those. The guy on next year's ballot that kind of piques my interest is Jimmy Rollins, what he did from the shortstop position, the long career that he had, and the championship pedigree that he showed. He's a guy that I could see getting in relatively early. I don't know about first ballot because they tend not to put people in first ballot, but I think that Jimmy Rollins of next year's class, he's definitely legitimate. Is Tim Lincecum a first ballot Hall of Famer? Not sure on that, but man, what a career. I mean, he's one of those guys, and he reminds me of Larry Walker. And before that, another guy that had some Hall of Fame buzz but didn't get in was Dave Parker. If you go around to the peers at that time, they would say, and I remember I was covering the minor leaguers and I was covering some major leagues, and whenever Dave Parker's name came up, someone who wore a uniform and played on the field said, that guy is a future Hall of Famer. That's the way they talked about Todd throughout his career. But Tim Lincecum, you look at him in real time and say, that guy's a future Hall of Famer. Now, there is some value to boiling down the numbers, and we'll have to do that. But I think that should be part of the decision. It's like, is this guy a Hall of Famer? And when you look at it and you look at the career and during the career, especially a team that had a tendency to win the World Series every other year, he was a guy you looked at as making that happen.
3 World Series rings, but only played 10 seasons. Back-to-back Cy Young Awards in his second and third season, which anyone that has 2 or more Cy Young Awards, most of those guys are in the Hall of Fame, only has 110 career wins. So very much it has to be this debate. And I think as recent as last year, he was still trying to make a comeback. I had heard some things and seen some things that he was working at a drive line to come back because the dude's still only 36 years old right now. And he's going to be on a Hall of Fame ballot next year. That's crazy.
Hey, in the news yesterday was a very sad story of a manager in the Baltimore Orioles system, Ron Johnson, who died of the COVID-19 disease. And he was only 64 years old. But Ron, when I was covering Double-A in Memphis, I was covering the Memphis Chicks, a Kansas City Royals affiliate. And I remember sitting in his office one day and we were talking about guys. And I asked the question, I can't even remember who the player was. Did he hang around too long? And Ron had a very short career. He came up with the Royals with Clint Hurdle, didn't really last in the major leagues that long, but ended up going into coaching. And he looked at me, he says, let me tell you something. Guys in this game, especially if you love the game or you put your heart and soul into it, you play until they stop giving you a uniform. So if Tim Lincecum thinks someone's going to hand him a uniform, I am all for him trying to make a comeback.
Yeah, I mean, did Daniel Bard teach us nothing? Have we learned nothing from Daniel Bard?
Well, sometimes I think we kind of own a guy's career. Oh, don't stick around any longer. It's like, guess what? At some point, yeah, he is entertaining you. You are paid for it. But at some point, his career is his career.
Well, we mentioned Todd Helton somewhere in there, and I found another interesting statistic that I was looking up was, players who stuck around with the same team throughout the entirety of their career. And I think it was Brooks Robinson, 23 consecutive seasons. We know Cal Ripken, George Brett, all those guys, and everyone who played 20 or more seasons with the same franchise is in the Hall of Fame. And if you spent 18 years or more with the same franchise for the entirety of your career, there's 37 guys. 30 of those 37 guys have gotten in. And there's Todd Helton right there, one notch below at 17 years. So they keep giving him a jersey, but he keeps playing. He keeps contributing. All the other guys that didn't get in, still some really great notable names like a Willie Wilson. I know you'll know well. And Todd Helton, there's so much to love about his candidacy, but do you think, and again, we talked about it already, but is it just that there's too much noise, not about PEDs, but too much noise about Coors Field and what it all means, and people just aren't quieting that down and looking at what this man did for nearly 2 decades?
It was easier for a couple of guys that had PED rumors hanging over their head, talking about Mike Piazza, Jeff Bagwell. It was easier for them to get in than it was for Larry Walker because, as he said, his PED was Coors Field, the atmosphere here, the big outfield. I think that Larry Walker broke down some of that. So I think Todd has more of a chance. I think the fact that he wasn't linked to the PEDs in an era where it's really wrought with confusion here. Do I vote for this guy? Do I not? He was never linked in a way that you said, yeah, oh, this guy definitely used PEDs. So I think that helps Todd at this point. Is it enough? That's the question. Was the peak of his career long enough? Was his career long enough? When the back problems set in, did that shorten it to the point that he doesn't get in? I think those are legitimate questions to discuss, but I do think he does have a shot.
There's one thing in particular I wanted to pick your brain about, if there's any part, because we've really, really had a deep dive on Todd Helton's career and all the numbers and broken down, especially the offense, which is a lot easier to do. But I think if there's one part where I really wish like we had a more tangible case about is his defense. And as someone who watched him for all those years, again, now like the fancy statistics, right, are actually dragging down his career WAR because his defense, they see it as a negative. Right. It's, that Wanted to see. Okay, so
That's a good answer.
to that.
That's a great answer.
Right.
I'm
All right. So
here.
my next question is.
No. I watched one of the best defensive first basemen of his time. One of the things that he did, I thought better than almost anybody I've seen in my entire life, was throw to other bases. I remember an argument where Clint Hurdle, who played with Keith Hernandez, who I thought was a great defensive first baseman, and the way that the things that he did to take away the short game, where he could charge a bunt and get the lead runner out. Todd did all those things and maybe even a little bit better. And that was a part of his career that really wasn't brought to the forefront. I do think part of it is this. He played in Denver, smaller market. Derek Lee, I thought that as far as fielding a throw at first base, because I think he was made of elastic, he could really reach those throws. He got more Gold Gloves, I think, than Todd did. I think Todd got 3 of them. Todd probably deserved 6. I think if Todd played today, he would be like Nolan at first base. I mean, there isn't a first baseman that is handling the bag the way that Todd did in his career. I don't know what goes into a number that turns defense of Todd Helton into a negative. I mean, I would really love to see that number, laugh at it, and call up the people who came up with the number and ask if they were kidding.
Derek Lee also played with the Cubs in Chicago.
Yes.
So you talk about that small market versus large market, and
the team was more. And let's face it, the team was more successful. I mean, I think that what hurts Todd Helton as much as Coors Field is the fact that he participated in 2 playoffs with his team, and most of the seasons were losing seasons. If you want to look at it, that cost him a chance at the MVP in 2000. I mean, Jeff Kent won it. Barry Bonds was up there. Todd Helton had as good a year as those guys did. I mean, my goodness, during a game in August, he actually touched 400 with a batting average, and he hit over 40 home runs. His home run in the season finale of John Rocker was the beginning of the end of the Braves dynasty. I mean, you look at all that, but the team went 82-80. And that cost him. And I think he finished I think it was like something like 7th in the NL MVP voting, even
Fifth,
though
5th.
That's it. Even though he was the Associated Press MLB Player of the Year.
Yeah, that's that one was absolutely brutal. It is too bad that, like you said, though, that the rest of the team was kind of dragging it down, because the rest of that offense just wasn't, unfortunately, good, which begs to mind the other question that I think we were asked last week, and I've been thinking about it too, the seminal Todd Helton moment. Is it the home run off of Saito and throwing the helmet, or is it just catching the final out of the NLDS? I mean, he didn't really do anything. He fielded a perfectly fine throw from Troy Tulowitzki.
He made it a moment.
Excited about the next thing that was going to happen, but yeah.
How about this? If you want to go with the sight at the time, the sight, the sound, and everything else, it was the home run off Takashi Saito in that game against the Dodgers. But if you want to say, okay, we are going to make, and they need to do this, we're going to make a statue of Todd Helton out of Coors Field or outside of whatever Hall of Fame that they put for the Rockies. That moment, catching the ball at the end of the National League Championship Series to send the team to the World Series, the expression on his face, and the fact that I think that the Rockies fans, they saw all those years of cheering for a team that often didn't go anywhere. It was very good in the beginning, but they weren't rewarded for years. They saw that in the relief and joy on his face.
If somebody wants to pay for it, we could probably find room at the DNVR bar for the Todd Helton statue. So we've got space. We'll figure it out. People want that. Well, Thomas, I mean, you got to see Helton on the road as well. And I think that's part of the conversation that people aren't really recognizing at this point is how well he still hit on the road. Obviously, the splits were large, but you see that with decent amount of players. It was still really good. When you got to view him in other ballparks, did you ever get the sense that, oh, man, there's the kryptonite. He's just not in Coors Field. His powers are weakened, and he's now just a slightly above average player? Or did he still seem to be that Hall of Fame first baseman?
What I saw from him, and it was something in our conversation last night, the story is up on Rockies.com, where he said he was most proud of his doubles. He said, I didn't hit a bunch of soft singles, and I'm not really a home run hitter. I was a doubles hitter. He hit the ball to the same places in the ballpark. Yes, the first game of the road trip, he, like everybody else that has ever worn this uniform, had to adjust to the different flight of the baseball. He adjusted quicker than others. When he hit the ball on the road, he hit the ball hard. I think in that 2000 season, his numbers were really good on the road. And it seems like to me, you go back and look at him, his last few good seasons, which were when the team was competitive. You look at that 2007 team. Also, you look at the 2009 team. This is a guy that hit very well on the road, that was a guy you feared on the road, and that's what mattered. I mean, obviously the numbers were different, but hey, if the other team is scoring fewer runs and you're scoring fewer runs, guess what? All you have to do is score more than the other team to win the ballgame.
That's the secret. Yeah.
That does track. That followed that through to its logical conclusion, and that sounds correct.
Yes. Funny enough, in that 2000 season, Todd Helton did hit more doubles on the road, 31, than he did at home, 28.
Check out Scott coming in with a super chat saying, "Great show. Thanks for teaching me about Dick Allen. Got to appreciate that."
Was he one of your favorite ball players in growing up in West Virginia?
When I was really little, he was. You had the baseball cards, and hey, I was an early reader. I remember, I think it was in Life magazine where he was playing for the Phillies, and the fans were all over him for some reason. I mean, he was one of the first guys wore a batting helmet. It was one of those no-ear batting helmets. He wore a batting helmet when he went out to the field because he didn't know what people were going to throw at him. And with his spike, he wrote the word boo in like 4-foot-high letters right in front of his position, and then just took his position and played the game. That's like cool. And Dick Allen, I remember him with the White Sox when they had those red and white pinstripe uniforms and the light blue on the road. And he was a guy that people feared. And you talk to people who were around at that time. I had the pleasure during the winter meetings once of having a lunch with Tony Perez, Willie Horton, and Tony Phillips, the late former player. And it was the most unbelievable thing. And they brought up Dick Allen and were discussing how the ball came off his bat. He was one of those guys that I wish I would have been able to, and I wish I would have turned my phone down, but one of those guys that I wish I would have been able to see, but and see take batting practice. I tell people this, when I think of a hitter, I think of the sound of the ball off his bat. And the way to know that is I'm fortunate enough to go down during batting practice. There's a small handful of guys that the sound off their bat is so loud, almost frightening, that you're mesmerized. Barry Bonds was one. Mark McGwire was one. The guy who actually may have hit balls harder was Mike Piazza. And then Todd is at that level. Todd in batting practice, and it was almost like you're watching some NFL film thing. You would hear this crash off the bat, almost feel the wind of the bat was whipping through. Then you would hear this, you would hear the grunt, almost like he was tackling a quarterback. But I would have loved to have heard the ball come off Dick Allen's bat. And Dick Allen, Reggie Jackson, those two guys, I would have loved to have heard that. Maybe Frank Howard, maybe Harmon Killebrew.
Well, speaking of bone-crunching tackles, I got to plug a little rugby. Thomas, you got a rugby story? What is your level of rugby interaction?
I don't have a rugby story. I knew a couple of women who played rugby in college, and I always thought, you're tougher than I am. But
there you go. There you go. Well, these I'll tell you what, right before things shut down, I was able to get out to Infinity Park for a couple of games. And when things come back, it's going to be really cool out there in Glendale, Colorado, because it's becoming known as Rugby Town, USA, officially designated Rugby Town National Training Center, home of the USA Eagles men's and women's rugby 15s teams. The training center is experimenting with a new concept, training crossover athletes to be rugby players. So you got guys like Glenn Big Dog Robinson. I love it. It's getting like it's almost he played in the XFL. I was going to say it's almost like the XFL. It's very close to the XFL. You've got some of these people coming over. Sean Clark, who worked out with the Colts in 2020. So You're going to see some athletes that you've maybe heard of before or seen around. They got somebody from the bobsled team coming in, Norvell DJ Stewart, Ed Paris, who played corner at LSU. Tremendous athletes coming to Glendale, Colorado to get trained at Infinity Park, see if they can make it, because rugby is about to become the next big sport in America, and it starts right here in the great state of Colorado. So make sure you check out Colton Strickler's podcast, all the stuff we've got for you over on DNVR Rugby. Hit them up on Twitter. Follow them. They'll get you, whether you're totally new to the game and you need to learn about it, or you need those in-depth interviews about everything that's going on. He's got all that for you. So check him out. Learn a little bit about rugby. Find out why they keep kicking the ball out of bounds. There's some big boys and gals crashing into each other. Extraordinary athletes.
Yeah, I think actually my other rugby story is, and I don't know if it ever materialized. I was asked to do a logo for a women's rugby team that the person who asked me liked it, but it was amateur team in Memphis. I don't know if it ever got produced. I would love to know if it did, though. That would be.
Oh, wow.
You're a big logo guy. You like jerseys. You've got that great Todd Radom book. We've looked at that in the press box before. There's been some rumblings about the Rockies. There it is on your bookshelf.
Yes, there it is.
There's been some rumblings that maybe the Rockies will add a new, uniform. Thoughts on this? Long overdue. Do you think we'll just see a slight alteration, or maybe a nod to the Negro Leagues and maybe a Denver White Elephants jersey?
I don't know if that will happen. There will be logo things that will go on with that, trademarks. Here's what I know, or what I believe I know about the jersey, and I have some pretty good sources on this. I guess it was mentioned online that they were coming out with a new uniform. It's my understanding that nothing is happening this year, but probably next year when Nike, which has taken over for Majestic as the uniform provider for Major League Baseball, that Nike will do a series of kind of alternate uniforms, change kits, if you will, for a number of teams. And it's believed that the Rockies would be one that they would come up with an additional uniform, maybe replace something that there was no truth, I've been told by a number of people, both locally and people that know what's going on with uniforms, no truth to the idea that they were going to break out a new uniform in 2021.
Right.
Maybe we'll see another turn ahead the clock uniforms. Do you like those? Are they so bad that they're good? I think they're so bad they're good.
The truth of the matter is, if you recall the backstory, because it was sponsored by Century 21, the turn ahead the clock uniforms were, how will baseball look in the year 2021? And I think manager, yes.
What?
Yes, that was the story behind the uniform after they got the Century 21 sponsorship. And I remember a manager saying, we have played baseball for over 100 years, and the uniforms are that much different than they did in the late 1800s. I don't think this is happening. There were some good things about that. It was a bit creative. I think it got teams out of having to be totally traditional. I think that it brought the logos out there. But I would like to see that come back this year simply because it is 2021. And it's funny. I bring that up, and I thought about that recently. I have no information. For all I know, it could come back this year.
Ooh.
That would be amazing.
Well, how about this? Let us make it happen. Let's just start and make sure that it comes back. I mean, that was a really strange uniform, but
yeah.
Especially the Rockies one. The Rockies one actually worked. I thought the Mariners was a bit confused. The Pirates was actually scary with that big red pirate on it, but some of them worked.
Well, yeah, they turned the clock ahead, and it's crazy to think, like you said, it was 2021. So we are now in the future, and still no sign in sight of flying cars. Very disappointing. I was promised a lot more when I was a kid. But if we've already turned ahead the clock, we might just need to go to another planet. That's all the rage, right? The multiverse. So what do uniforms look like on another planet? Let's take it to that level and see what it would be.
And I'm interested in the uniforms, but if we go to other planets, I wonder how the stats there will compare to Coors Field. People keep saying it's like playing baseball on the moon. Let's see what happens if we actually do play baseball on the moon or another planet. Obviously, the moon is not a planet. Believe me, I know this. Okay, so let's not have any tweets.
Didn't want the comment section to.
That's right.
Thomas Harding believes the
moon is not another planet, but it is flat. And if they happen to play games on the moon, the left field foul pole may be 1.5 miles away. Just to make it fair.
Well, I guess every pitcher would be, at least from the video we saw from the Apollo trips, every pitcher would be throwing knuckleballs, right?
Right. So I do want to ask you a little bit about some current Rockies stuff. Before we do that, though, I just want to get general, whatever Larry Walker comment you'd like to make. We've done all this Hall of Fame week. It almost feels like we've just gotten used to it now, but it wasn't that long ago that we were all just floored at the same time that it happened. It barely happened in his final year of it. Again, another guy who you got to see up close, which I think really helps to understand what he brought. If anybody is sold short by the numbers, and he's got great numbers. That's not to say that his numbers aren't fantastic, but we know that Larry Walker was 100% that guy for his career. So when people talk about him, what do you think of, and maybe, what is missed by other people when you hear other people talking about Larry Walker and you wish you could say, man, I wish I could take you to this one series or this one time or share this story with you about this guy?
Actually, the year before I came on in 2000. In 1991, he won the percentage Triple Crown, the slash line, the batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage. He was the first guy since George Brett in 1980 to win the percentage Triple Crown. And I remember having this discussion in spring training, and this was before everything really kicked in with all the PED controversy. Who is the best player in the National League? Larry Walker or Barry Bonds? And people were somewhat split on that. I mean, there was enough sentiment for Larry Walker that it actually was a conversation. When I watched him, the thing that I liked about him, and I have kind of a bit of a football background. I grew up playing the sport. I covered it at every level. And when you cover a college or pro game, I don't know what happens now with COVID, but when you cover one of those games, last 5 minutes, you take the elevator down to the field so you can get to the dressing room without being trampled by the fans. And you're on the sideline watching the end of the ball game. And I remember the first time I was on the sideline watching an NFL game, and I'm like, how do people this big move this fast and change direction this well? The baseball player that reminds me most of football in that ability to do almost anything you can ask with his body is Larry Walker. I would actually go out in spring training, and when they were doing base running drills, I'd go by the fence or as close as I could get and watch the man run the bases. Because there was grace, there was speed, there was power. You didn't want to step in front of him. That back then, where a catcher could block the plate, no catcher really wanted to block the plate with Larry Walker. So as amazing as that swing was, and the ball coming off the bat, it didn't have the sound was different. It wasn't a Bonds, Helton type sound, but it was a sound of almost like efficiency, where he hit the ball so hard you didn't hear it, It's so efficient, it hit the bat, it's gone. And those are the things I remember about Larry Walker, just visually as a player.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back on that sound. Yeah, it's like a right, like
it was really interesting because you knew there was power behind it, and you knew there was force. But if he wanted to put the ball in the third deck, he would hit it, and maybe you didn't hear it, but you knew it. You just knew it was gone. I mean, some of the video that they play now, it was exactly that. It was almost like the ball was gone as quickly as it got there.
Yeah. All right. Well, not quite as fun, but we do move now into current times. We've talked a lot about, the team feels like they're at a crossroads. It feels like there's two big Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado questions that are kind of hanging over the team, and can they still go with this group that sort of the era that more or less I think starts in 2016, right, with Troy Tulowitzki out. Trevor Story makes his debut. A lot of other guys, David Dahl made his debut that year. A lot of guys come in, and now we're kind of in this new era. A couple of postseason appearances, a couple of really disappointing years. Now the question seems to be, can this era of guys go at it one more time? Or are we nearing the cusp here of some kind of rebuild with the opt-out and Trevor Story becoming a free agent and all the things that could go on here? Does it feel to you like the Rockies are at a sort of pivotal crossroads in their history?
I wish I could say definitely where they are, but at the end of last season, we were promised that they would kind of give us a state of the Rockies. They have been very silent about that. And that makes it really hard to kind of guess and predict with any kind of certainty what the Colorado Rockies are going to do. I will go back to, and it was very early on when I had a long conversation with Jeff Bridich. And I talked about the fact that I was tracking this team as to when guys would become free agents and what the window would be. I think they actually made the playoffs a year before I thought they would. But and Bridich, to his credit, he thought that they were going to get there quicker than I thought. So I'll give him some credit for that. Now, the window to me is actually the end of this season, because that's when John Gray becomes a free agent and you really need to start making decisions on the pitchers. Do you try to find a way to make sure that Kyle Freeland stays around? But the last 2 years have been so bad that it may have shortened the window. I just don't know. I mean, it seems like they are at a standstill, and you're not going to know what their plan is for 2021 until they make a decision about right now. What do you do with Nolan Arenado? That's the big contract. That's something that probably has to be answered at the ownership level. What do you do with Trevor Story? I find it very hard for Trevor Story to decide to sign a long-term contract here when so much is out there for him in free agency. It's very hard for me to think he's going to sign one. I don't believe there's been any movement toward one. The last real movement was last year. It looked like they were going to go to arbitration, and then at the night before, I believe it is, they settled on a 2-year deal to eat up this time. I've heard nothing, and it's my understanding nothing is really going on there. So what do the Rockies do? Do they trade Nolan Arenado? One of my thoughts, what if you were to trade him and get back a couple of contracts that are much shorter, but it offsets some of the money, and this way the pitching you have and Trevor Story and maybe someone with a bad contract performs really well, then you kind of reset this thing right now and you have a chance in 2021. If you trade Trevor Story, maybe you get back more, but maybe it's a lot younger and you go into a longer rebuild. And Nolan Arenado has told the entire world he's not interested in being around for a rebuild. Would that create more friction, or would it be like a Todd Helton situation where Todd Helton, he wasn't all that happy about it at the time, to be honest with you, because he always wanted to win just like everybody in this game. But he did patiently sit through some rebuilds, turned down a couple of trade opportunities, and ended up getting to the World Series. If you recall the trade to Boston.
Yeah.
There was another trade that was rumored, but it was to the Texas Rangers. And he and Michael Young both basically said, hey, I'm not interested in being traded at this point. By the way, do you guys remember the headlines when the Rockies were going to trade Larry Walker to the Texas Rangers and the deal fell through? Everybody in America, Walker, Texas. Oh gosh. It was a head slapper and everybody used it.
I mean, if it's right there, you got to swing at that pitch.
Right, yeah. There were 2 Walker trades that didn't go through. I remember the one for Matt Williams to the Arizona Diamondbacks because it was right around Christmas. And I think we had people visiting, and this thing just blows up. And all of a sudden, Larry and Matt Williams both announced pretty much at the same time that they were going to invoke their no trade clause. So that deal didn't happen.
Yeah, the Rockies are in a precarious spot where in some ways it's like they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, as far as a rebuild or going all in. Because you might be wasting your time maybe a little bit or certain resources to try to continue to contend, or again, you're rebuilding for the future. And even with this scenario that you brought up, Thomas, about trading Nolan Arenado, we've been looking at that in our Free Trade Fridays, and there's some quality ball players that the Rockies could get for Nolan Arenado that would make the team better and maybe keep the window open a little bit longer. But there's that PR issue for the Rockies and them trading one of their own, like we saw in the Helton case, and Cargo being with them for so long. And I think they're a little hesitant to make moves if the fan base is going to be disappointed in that.
Well, here's the thing that, and I go back and forth because sometimes I think I'm the cause of the problem, which I'm not. Hey, we all like to self-aggrandize, right? Whenever this team does well and goes to the postseason, all of us write these stories of all these homegrown players. How many teams this homegrown are actually winning? It's not very many. It has to me, most teams, there is a mix of homegrown, trade, free agent. If you're the San Diego Padres right now that are challenging, if you're the Tampa Bay Rays, you develop people to trade to turn into more people, and then they all become major leaguers or they all become your starters. There's more than one way to do this, but the Rockies have done it this way forever. So when this homegrown group does well, then it's like amazing drafting, because it is very hard to put 6, 7, 8, 9 guys on the field at the same time. It really is, from the same organization. The pan-out rate just isn't that high, and the Rockies are trying to do it. I would love to see them make the trades. Here's the issue that they have. They can't go – if they go into a full-blown rebuild, it means trading German Marquez or John Gray or Kyle Freeland also. They so rarely get the pitching that the starting pitching that can actually win, that they can't make that type of deal. So you almost have to trade a Nolan Arenado or a Trevor Story. I just wish they were more creative about the other parts of their roster, where you could bring in somebody that maybe can make you a little bit better at first base or at second base, or say you trade Nolan Arenado, you move Brian McMahon to his natural position of third base, and then make the team better that way. I would like to see them do some of that, a more mixed approach than they do.
Creativity is the word, right?
That a lot, yeah. Being more creative with the other parts of the roster. I've always defended the homegrown part, but by saying that needs to be the core of your team, not the entirety of your team. Your most important players. I think especially the pitching. We look at these pitchers now. It's like guys to be able to deal with the Coors Field thing, to have come up through it, to have been taught about it, to deal with it at a young age and come out the other side the way we've seen John Gray, the way I think we've seen Kyle Freeland do a little bit here. But yeah, you gotta, for the other parts, you can go get a mashing first baseman, like you said, or some dude, some. We know the bullpen stuff hasn't worked out in terms of spending money, but you still got to make it
sometimes, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So you have to keep trying in the bullpen. I think you're going to have bad years. That's just the way bullpens are. Hey, even with the big spending teams, a lot of times what happens is they get a bullpen, it doesn't work. They have the money to change it during the season. But before I came here, like I say, I covered the St. Louis Cardinals, and I never will forget how much they hyped their prospects. But I would say not very many of them helped the St. Louis Cardinals directly in wearing birds on the bat. They got traded for people that helped them. I remember Adam Kennedy, one of the better hitters I covered in the minor leagues. He gets sent for, I believe it was Jim Edmonds. They had some guys that you never heard of. I don't remember the names. I think one guy's last name was Ludwig.
Ryan Ludwig.
Yeah, Ryan Ludwig. Trade him to the Oakland A's for Mark McGwire. So they used those players in trades. One of the guys they traded that turned out a really good major league player was Placido Polanco. Same with Joe McEwing. Those guys that helped the team win. Then they got back more parts that helped the team win that way. So there is more than one way to do this, but it does seem like the Rockies believe that it's more valuable if your own guys do it. And I would wonder about rethinking that mentality.
It's
since
a similar.
You brought up I just want to go, since you brought up the Cardinals, and we got this question here in the comments. We have to put you on the spot, do a little mini hit for the cycle here. because I went over on this, so I'll see
Okay.
if you know. Who can you name the players that the Rockies got back for Larry Walker?
Oof.
Let's see here.
And if you can, would you do it for us?
Okay.
Two-parter.
All right. Yes.
Thanks, teacher man.
I can see one of the pitchers because he ended up pitching for the Milwaukee Brewers in the major leagues. I can actually see him. I can see his face. I can see his position. I don't remember. I'm going to have to go back for that. There was a guy named Jason Birch that they got in that deal. Where he made news was actually he came out as gay after his career. And he said everyone knew about it. The Rockies knew about it. Gosh, who was I know you, whoever just flashed on the screen. I can't. I know
because she listened to the show yesterday.
UF 117 Nighthawk. Yes, she can. And she's wearing a St. Louis Blues hat. I listen to their games a lot on the radio.
And she's a Lakers fan. We try not to talk about her weird fandom.
It's okay. As long as she can put up with my Pittsburgh Penguins. What was that man's name?
CN are the initials. CN.
Chris Narvaez? No.
Chris Narvason. Yeah, you got it. We'll give it to you.
Yeah.
It's Chris Narvason. And after that, I am not sure.
The only one you missed, I think, is Luis Martinez.
Yes, there you go. But who did the Rockies actually get out of that deal with the money that they the money they got from St. Louis? There was cash involved in it, or some offset of salaries. There it is.
Yeah.
Hey, put the spinning heads up for this. Okay?
We ask the questions, not you, Thomas. Okay.
That's what I do.
Cut his mic.
For that.
I think Dexter Fowler.
Exactly. Yeah, Dexter.
Yeah.
It was back in the old crazy days of the draft where he had
Wild West.
He had Scott Boras as his agent, and he basically said, Dexter's a second-round pick no matter when you pick him. And a lot of teams tried to avoid him. And the Rockies finally decided to do it in the 11th round, and they call up Dexter and Boras. They're like, okay, this is what I'm worth. And the Rockies were like, what about this? No, this is what I'm worth. So in the Larry Walker deal, they were able to offset the money enough to where they signed Dexter Fowler for exactly the second-round bonus that that his talent said he deserved. And he served the Rockies well for a few years.
Which later begat Jordan Lyles. So, I mean, it all works out. It all works out.
Jordan Lyles theater, right?
Well,
wow.
It's funny, and this kind of ties it in. The more things change, the more things stay the same. As you said, the Cardinals hyping up their prospects and then trading them out to improve the major league roster and get the guys they actually want. We're seeing that with Tampa Bay. They've done it for a long time, got them to the World Series last year, and we're seeing it in the division with the San Diego Padres, who love either hyping up their own guys or having the industry hype up their own guys, and they've done it to their advantage, and that's probably the other difficult part for the Rockies in their decision-making process is you always got to deal with the Dodgers, but now you got the Padres.
Well, if you watch what the Padres have done, they're doing what the Rays do, which when you have a player that has some major league service time and you can deal them, you usually get back prospects. So in those deals, they get more prospects that they could deal off. So they're perpetuating their minor league system that way, rather than expecting them all to pan out to the point that you can trade them for other players. They actually get those guys in other deals. Tampa Bay does that too, and I think they do it very effectively. The difference between, say, a Tampa Bay and definitely between a Tampa Bay and some of the larger market franchises is when Tampa Bay gets back the veteran player after they trade some of their prospects, they'll trade that veteran player for
flip him too. Yeah, right.
The Pittsburgh Pirates are kind of in the midst of something like that. The only risk in that, and the Rockies have been through it before in the early days of O'Dowd, is what if you end up with a bunch of prospects and they don't pan out? Then it really sets you back even further. Of course, as O'Dowd once said, well, he said this before the 017 team broke, he goes, if this doesn't work, somebody else will be trying to figure this out.
That's going to be somebody else's problem.
That's right.
So, all right. Well, we will. Yeah. Well, we're obviously going to keep our eyes on all that. Hopefully, there's news to talk about before too long. We have an excuse to have you back on and talk about stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. This lack of news is kind of bothersome. I mean, I'm writing a lot about the history of this franchise, and it's a wonderful thing, but it's 2021. I don't really want to be writing about 1993 or 94, 95. I would like to be writing about this thing coming up here. I know that a lot of teams are stuck because of the uncertainty over whether you have fans in the stands or the designated hitter, but you also see teams making moves, and you wonder if the teams that are waiting for everything to be settled before they move, if they're not falling behind.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep all our eyes on all that. We know everyone's going to keep reading Thomas Harding. Like I said, the chronicler of the Colorado Rockies. You've got to be there catching all of it at MLB.com, Rockies.com, all that great content there. Follow him on Twitter at Harding. It's _ at MLB.
Why could I come up with something? I think someone had taken my name. Why? I don't know. Hopefully, actually, there's a more famous Thomas Harding who's writing in Europe. I think he wrote for the London Daily Telegraph, and I don't know if it's the Guardian, but something like that. I can't even be the most famous Thomas Harding.
I was gonna say
you're our favorite. You're our favorite Thomas Harding.
Okay,
campaign on Twitter to get that just at Thomas Harding for you. Well, the only hashtag the real Thomas Harding. So we always appreciate chatting with you. Of course, we'll have to catch up again maybe sometime during spring training, however that goes.
Do we still do that in baseball? I thought we moved to
in.
summer camp. I thought we're still doing spring training. We'll see.
I don't know. I think we do whatever we can,
Right.
If you are a type A type planner, this has been awful. If you're kind of like I am, where you just sort of go with the flow, it's been not as bad, although it has been a very difficult time.
Yeah. So make sure you're following everyone on social media. Make sure you subscribe to the DNVR.com. That way you don't miss out on any of the written content published Falls Count Anywhere this morning on the Hall of Fame. Make sure you check on that. Plus, you get discounts on hats, shirts, masks. You get bigger beer when you come down to the DNVR bar, holding watch parties at capacity, socially distanced, for the Nuggets and the Avs right now. You can swing by, have some Breck brews, enjoy some sports. It's a good time. And also, when you subscribe to the DNVR.com, you get to hang out with us in our private chat room, talking about all the other sports, movies, television, skiing, snowboarding, professional wrestling. We didn't do no CM Punk references today. I'm sorry, it's hour 6. We usually get our professional wrestling references in there somewhere, so we'll have to have you.
You got it on before the show, but
yeah.
During, right?
Exactly. Make sure you're getting all of Thomas's content over there. You're hanging out with us every day. You continue to be absolutely awesome out there. I promise you we will continue to be absolutely Patrick Lyons, Drew Creasman, and Thomas Harding in here. And until next time, we will see you at the ballpark.